Thank you. And thank you all for coming. And I'm sorry I was late. Something came up at the last minute that I had to attend to.
Go a little closer to the mic.
Little closer to the mic? Is that better? Okay. Again, I'm sorry for being late. The work I've been doing the last several years is felt, and it's a very specific type of felting called needle felting, and there are other types of felting, and it actually has been around for many, many years, the other types of felting. But needle felting was actually developed in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and somebody discovered it by accident. They had a needle in a hand and some loose fiber in their other hand, and they wondered what would happen if they poked the needle into the fiber. And lo and behold, it caused the fibers to begin to tangle together and turn into felt. I got to put this down. And I have to pick this up. That's better. I can't stand in one spot. So this particular piece started in 2018 when I was reading on the internet that 50% of the emperor penguin population had died in one season. And I went, oh, this can't be happening. This is supposed to be years away, if it happens at all. And I was really, really shocked, and I started doing a little bit more research. And lo and behold, at first I thought it was not a true story, so I snopesed it. Is that a verb? I don't think so. Anyhow, I did check it for accuracy because I really didn't believe what I was reading in front of my face. And as you are probably all aware, there's a lot of posts on Facebook that really aren't real. But no, this one was an actual happening in the world. And it really caught me up short. I've been an animal lover most of my life. And I love penguins, those little, guys that walk across the ice, kind of shuffle across the ice. And I spent probably about 6 months crying. I could not talk about what was happening in the world for about that period of time without bursting into tears and not being able to talk at all. So I thought, well, I can't just sit here in my little cabin under the pine trees and not do anything about this. Now, I had done a couple of other watercolor paintings about the environmental changes we're beginning to experience, but they're very subtle. You have to know what I'm saying to catch the meaning. And I wanted it to be a little punchier than that. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And a lot of my ideas come from dreams. In fact, I would say probably 75% of my work comes almost directly from dream images. And these images are a complete image. And I wake up and sketch them out, add the colors. They come in color, which is really kind of nice. But this particular work, not all of my work obviously comes from that. And this is one that did not come from my dreams. It was more a concept that I was working on. And when I first came up with this idea, I wanted the first few of the panels, I refer to these as panels, to be at the bottom of the wall. And I thought, oh, Lisa and Karen, they're not going to do that. There's no way that's going to happen. And I thought, well, I'll just proceed with this idea and see where it goes. And I got the imagery pretty fast. And I knew that I wanted to do this rain. And I had worked on doing rain in a couple of my previous felt works. And so I had kind of an idea of how to do it already. I'm completely self-taught, so I have no idea what I'm doing really. But you can kind of figure it out as you go along. And it's really, when you think about it, it's not a very hard media in that all you're doing is with a needle and some fiber and some foam behind all this, you're poking. I mean, that's really not very hard to do. It's not like watercolors where you have to learn how to float things and how to mix your colors and how to add maybe certain other things to get different effects in your work. You know, dry brush, wet into wet, all that good stuff that you can get from watercolor. I mean, it's basically, that is what you're doing, is poking fibers together when you're needle felting. So it's not a very hard technique. So I had a very good idea of the direction I was going to go in. And I wanted to do 13 panels because of the meaning we all have behind the number 13. It's not a lucky number, it's an unlucky number, and I think that's kind of where we are right now. We're in unluck, not good luck. So I started working on them, and it took me just about a year to finish them. And part of the way through, I wanted to get a good look at them from a distance, because it's hard to do that in my cabin. And also, when I'm working on these, my eyesight has always been pretty poor, and now that I'm older, it's even worse. So I'm working usually only, you know, maybe a foot away from my eyeballs so I can see what I'm doing. So I have a hard time getting that distance thing that you really need when you're making something, so you can see it as a whole and not as this little tiny piece that you're currently working on. This is a really sensitive microphone. Bitch. So originally, I had the idea they were all going to be, I knew I was going to step them. I knew that from the beginning. And I sketched out what I was going to do. And believe it or not, let me find the sketch. I have it marked. So you probably can't even see it. It's very small. That was what I started with. It's very, very tiny. I've made all kinds of notes on it since then, and squiggles, things, notes from other things, probably other little drawings and stuff. So that was the first sketch. Did I drop something? Probably.
Can you try and talk without it for a second and see if it works?
Yeah.
Just talk.
Oh, just talk? Oh, that's nice. I can just talk. Can you hear me?
Everybody hear her?
Because I can talk pretty loudly. Okay, good.
All right, let's get rid of this thing.
It doesn't work very well. That's part of the problem. You have to talk only at a certain spot on it. So originally I had this line going through all the way across, and I knew that was going to be what I was going to do. I wanted to put all the rain in here. And then I started working on it, and I thought, gee, 13 panels of these lines of rain. You know, it's an interesting concept, but by the end it might get a little boring. So I started to think how I could still do the idea, but get enough variation in the patterns that it would carry through the whole thing. So I started thinking about the rain coming down a little bit lighter and what that might look like. I knew always that I was going to put a child in the painting. That was a concept from the very beginning. And then it was a matter of balancing her and making her work inside all this other stuff that's going on. So I definitely was trying to carry the colors in this panel throughout. And I'm not sure I was successful. She kind of pops out a lot, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. So I did come up with a lot of variations on this straight down pattern. I started making them shorter and longer, and at a certain point I thought, gee, what if I broke it up and ended up and had it get really, really cold, and we go into snow? And then so I started thinking about that. And you can see I made that change as I got towards the end. And, and the lightning, I was going to have that in only one panel. And I did the one panel, and I looked at it, and I thought, oh, this is not going to work. So I think what I'm saying is you start out, I particularly anyway, start out with a concept and an idea, and I change as I go through it. I don't always stick to what I started with. The biggest change for me was when I brought the panels, they weren't framed, they were just loose. So I think I had 10 maybe or 11, and I brought them down here and hung them up where I could really, really look at them. And then I stepped back and I thought, wow, I don't know about this. And I asked a couple of people whose opinions I trust. One of them, of course, is Lisa. The other one is my daughter. And we talked about how I was going to pull it all together into a unit and feel that it was done and that it carried the message I was interested in carrying, which is obviously about global warming and its effects and what that's going to mean for us in the future. Not us so much probably, but our children and their children. So I kind of got the idea that maybe I needed to add more life to it, which is where the polar bear came from. Now my daughter, that little stinker, she said, Mom, I think maybe you should put in a polar bear. And she said, have you ever seen one swim? And I thought, I'm going to kill you. But I thought it was an interesting concept, and I kind of liked the idea. And of course, how could you not love a polar bear? And at this point in time, I don't know if you're aware, but because the ice is melting, those polar bears are dying because they're drowning or they can't get food. So their population has already really pummeled as well as penguins. In fact, all things where it's cold are starting to really suffer because of the climate change is so dramatic and the ice is melting so fast that they're losing their environment. So I added the polar bear, but the biggest thing that happened for me when I came down here and put them on the wall, I think I was maybe to here. And I thought, that looks pretty cool. But what if I, instead of making them continue to go up, I make the last few go down? And I thought, I like that. But it also meant for me, in my way of thinking, that I had to come up with the stuff to go down. So there is a second part of this. I brought what I'm working on tonight. And it's not water, it's desert. It's kind of the other end of the spectrum. It's the hot part of the world. And it's been really interesting for me to work on that because I felt really solid about working with water and rain because I live in Northern California and I lived on the coast for an incredibly long time where it rains all the time. Of course, it never rains in Lake County. No, it rains a lot here. At least it did this last year, and it has in past years as well. And the rain just comes down. I look out the window, and it's like I'm inside a shower. It's raining so hard. And, I know that it doesn't really look like what I've done here, that it comes down in spatters. It comes down in, I can't even describe it, almost like dashes. But I didn't think the dashes would work as well in a painting as the line work. I wanted to really get the feeling that that rain was pounding, that it's coming down, it's coming down, it's coming down. And you can also see I gave up on the idea of starting them at the floor level. But partly I did that because there are, under these last 3 panels, and it's only these last 3, there's another set of 3 panels that fit up into here. What else can I say? I need some water. Thank you. One of the things I've discovered about fiber is I try to use it like watercolor. People have asked me, do you make your own fiber? Do you dye it? And I go, oh no, I would never get anything done if I did that. I mean, it took me a year just to do the felting part. If I had to start with raw fiber and clean it and card it and dye it, I would still be processing raw fiber and cleaning it and dyeing it. And then maybe I could start working. Or I could do everything white and gray and brown, because they come in those colors. The other idea I had when I started this was I really wanted this line to be straight all the way across. But what I've discovered with working with felt is because it's, I would be bored too. No, don't worry about it. I'm not offended, believe me. I'm probably, I can understand. Because it's malleable, it moves when you're working on it. So it's, I'm used to working on paper or canvas where you can draw a line across it and the line stays where you put it. As you work around it, the line doesn't move. But when you're working with fiber, especially when you're needle felting, you put the needle in here and you can see things move an inch away. And I kind of gave up on this straight line, realizing I could never make it work or it would take me another year to make it work. And the other thing that I was doing that I've never done in any kind of artwork is instead of starting with a piece of paper or a canvas as a set size, I was working on a piece of linen, and I had to figure out the framing and everything based on the concept and not on the finished work. Does that make any sense? I mean, most time you work 20 by 22, you buy a frame with the inside is 20 by 22, and it all works out. This didn't work that way at all. I had to think backwards, which I'm not very good at. So what I decided to do, instead of insisting that this be an absolutely straight line, was intentionally make it nonlinear. And I actually think it made it better. Which, it's kind of interesting when you're working on something, is to figure out what you need to let go to make something work and to make your life work. Because really, I probably would have spent another, I would say, quite a while to get that to be an absolutely straight line all the way across the work, just because of the material itself. I was asking it to do something that it doesn't do very well. And actually, most people working in felt, the work I've seen, they're not working much with line because it's hard to do in felt. I figured out a way to do it fairly early, so it's not really that hard if you know how to do it. But it's not, because everything is kind of mushy, when you're working with loose fibers and you're tightening them up as you go along, things happen that you don't expect, and you just have to work with it. But I think that's true of almost any medium. I know it's true of watercolors, which I've done quite a few watercolors, and you get a mistake in there, and you have to figure out, unless you just want to throw the whole thing away, and it's one of 2 that you've done over the last 3 or 4 months. For me, it's better to try to figure out how to make the things that don't work within the piece I'm working on, rather than throw it away and start all over, especially this one, because there's so many panels. It's like throwing away at least a year of work. So I am using fibers that I buy them dyed, but I do an awful lot of color mixing because it makes the work more vibrant. So often the blues they're not just blue. They have green in them, they have purple in them, they have brown in them. You have to the more you change the value in the fibers, they're harder and harder to mix because it doesn't mix like paint where the gray and the white mix together and give you gray. You still have a white piece of fiber and a black piece of fiber and a white piece of fiber and a black piece of fiber. And there's not any easy way of measuring either that I've discovered yet. So you have to make batches of the colors that you're using. And in this one, I did make several batches of blue. I made a huge batch of blue on a carder. Unfortunately, it's not a motorized one. And I did 3 batches of gray. One that was a warm gray. Actually, I did 6 batches of gray. I did warm and cool in 3 different values. So there's light, medium, and dark. And even then, I had to keep adding color to the different things that I had mixed because 6 color values from white to black in something this large, it wouldn't work. You got to have more color going on. One of the other ways I get a lot of variation in my color is I'm working from both sides. This is the back of the pieces. They all have felt on the back. This is linen in between. This is the front. And so what I do is I work back and forth. So I'm pushing these colors through to the front as well as putting these on the front. And I kind of go back and forth a little bit. I do all the back first. I discovered that early on. And then I do work on this for a while. And then when I get the front to a certain spot, I'll start pushing these colors through to the front. And I use them sometimes for shading when I need to. Some of them I push more through, but my feeling is it gives a depth to the color that you wouldn't get otherwise if all you have here are these yellows and browns and whites and stuff in there that your eye really doesn't pick up unless you get close. On this one, there are mostly red values mixed in. And what I did on this piece is I did a rainbow on the back side. So it starts with purple and then red, orange, yellow. I did skip green. I skipped blue because there's so much blue on the front. I figured it wasn't worth my while to do it that way. So I know I started with purple, red, orange, yellow, green, purple, and then all the way through to the end. That's what I did on the back. And if you look at them, there's, like right here, I pushed through a lot of color on the back to the front. And one of the reasons I did this was I was trying to color balance this little girl, and the flowers on her dress are kind of pinks and reds. So this is a pinky red I pushed through from the back. And I did that. You can see the orange coming through here. On the rain, what I did on the back was it has both the color and then a layer of white on top of that. So it's a color and then white on top of that on the back, and then just the blue on the front. And that allowed me, by pushing those fibers through, I was able to get a kind of a misty look, which would have been really hard to get with just the fibers itself because they're opaque. So you can't get a wash very easily. You have to fool the fabric or the fiber kind of. So that's that. Do I have anything else to say?
Can we look at these two side by side?
Yep.
So
So these are what I'm working on now. Actually, these two are pretty done.
Let's turn the back.
Oh, you want to see the back?
So that would be your palette. That's kind of your palette, or that's just give you additional color?
This is additional color. This is the palette. And this is a very muted palette for me, by the way. I usually use a lot of color, complementary colors. The imagery didn't seem to lend itself to that, yeah.
Do you know that you're going to have the undertone or the one we go through ahead of time? Do you start with the color on the bottom? And then you put your image, or do you kind of add that as you're working?
This goes, the back, these colors on the back go on first. That's the first thing I do. Okay, and when you turn it, so when this part is empty, you can see these little dots of color coming through. Then I put these colors on. And
But do you know you're going to put purple at the beginning?
yes,
Okay.
yes, I do. I know I'm going to pull those colors through. And there was a couple times when I wished I hadn't varied the colors so much on the back, and I did cheat sometimes. Like when there was one I really needed some green, so, and I forget what color was on the back. It might have been orange or something like that. And I added green on the back so I could pull it through. I needed green in a couple of spots really badly.
While we're holding these, can we show where these are going to go?
Yeah. So these they go at the end. So this is going to go in here. And then I'm working on the third one.
So just notice also the structure of the up, the up and downs. What size is the third one, and where does it go?
It goes where you're standing.
And is it longer than this, or
Yeah,
the
it
same
is.
size?
It's longer.
It's longer.
So when these are put together, the whole thing has to go up. So, yes.
Is that going to be more of the same piece?
Yeah, it's part two.
Is that more sustained?
Yeah, when I came down and I looked at the pieces that I had done, not only did I think it would be good if these graduated instead of continue to go up, I thought it would be really interesting if some of them went down.
Yeah.
Just compositionally, I thought that would be interesting. But so I had to think about that a lot, because what do you do? I mean, I could have done coral, I guess, and then, whales, and then those deep water triggerfish and stuff. But I kind of didn't want to do that. And then I came up with this idea of transitioning from water to sky. And at this end, where this is white, there's going to be a white sun underneath it that I haven't laid in yet. So this is the third piece. This is the one I'm working. This is the last one. I'm pretty close. And it goes under this piece. So there's going to be a sun here, very white, with rays coming down. That's the part I haven't done yet. And then this part's pretty close, the bottom part. I'm putting in a lizard in here to add to, and it's an endangered species that lives down in Mojave and Death Valley. It's called a fringe-toed lizard. One of the reasons I picked it is its back has this gorgeous pattern on it, and it's got all these color circles on it. So the background is kind of very deep red, and then there's a little bit of orange and a little bit of white on its back. And I thought it would pick up some of the snow look and carry it through. Just one of the reasons I picked it. I kind of wanted to go for the horned toad, which is really a lizard, because I had them as pets when I was young. But they're not endangered, and they're really cool looking, but they don't have that wonderful color pattern on them, so they got nixed. Also, I thought they would be really hard to do in felt. Does anybody know what they look like? they really do have like these horny things coming off of their faces and stuff. And I thought, oh man, in a small size, that's going to be tough to do, really hard to do. Any questions? More questions? Yeah.
So you decided way back when that this would have 13 panels? Did you just say that because that's the size of the wall? Or you have...
Well, no, I really wanted it to be 13 panels. I originally wanted it to go, I was making it to go here, and I wanted it to be on that wall, but the frames that we ended up buying were slightly larger than the ones we were sampling. And so it came out, I don't know, it's like 1.5 inches too long for that wall. It's all right, it looks fine here.
Do you use an electric felter?
An electric what?
Felter.
I don't have one. I have a little tiny one, and all it does is overheat.
Right, so all of it's done by hand?
Yeah, yeah. There is another technique that I'm going to begin experimenting with. I felt I couldn't do it on this piece. I was worried if I switched my technique, they would look too different and they wouldn't go together. But there is a paper you can felt on, and it kind of holds everything together, and you throw it in the dryer, and the dryer does the felting. And then you can go, and so it's basically it's a form of wet felting. And then you can go back in with needle felting and tighten things up or change whatever you want, add details. But you get kind of your a base background to work on that you haven't spent days, you know, poking at. Now, they do have, there are needles, they come in multiples. Where we go? Yeah. I'm not always just using one needle. This one has 5 needles in it. The needles are barbed. That's what makes them felt. The barbs grab onto the fiber and start mixing them together. I have, one of my felting tools is a 20 needle felter. I don't use it very much. I sometimes use it for finishing because 20 needles is really hard to push in to the fabric, because it does become a fabric as you felt it. It actually turns from fiber into felt. And you know that when you can't just pull the fibers out easily. Like today, I was getting rid of some fiber. I had too much in one spot. And I had to literally take tweezers and rip it out because it had become one with the other fibers. And that's the goal, is to make sure, you know, you've turned these fibers into a felt so it's durable and it will last. And I cheat a little bit because my last few needle feltings, I spray my piece with water and then I poke it. I poke the water into the fibers. And I do think it helps it bind together. I know it shrinks a little bit because when I go to stretch them on the canvas bars, I have to tug them to make them fit. Even though I'm making the felted area a little bit bigger than the stretcher bars, it shrinks more lengthwise than widthwise, and I have to stretch it again to get it to fit, so it doesn't, the edges don't show under the frame. Okay, Lisa's got carders. These are called hand carders. And what these do is mix colors. This one is obviously very small. It can't do a lot of fiber on it at one time. And it doesn't work very well, but for some things it works really well. Like sometimes I'll pick up a hunk of fiber and push it down on the thing I'm working on, and it's maybe too thick. And I can take this and I can hold down the fiber with one hand and pull some of the fibers out so I can thin it out that way. And I do that a lot on like a top layer or an area where I'm trying to get, like going from a dark to a light. So I'm getting the dark to the light by putting fewer fibers on top of the light that's underneath the dark, or vice versa. It doesn't really matter how you do it. These are a little bit bigger carders. They still don't card very much if you're doing a large piece. Obviously, they card a little bit more. I have an 8-inch mechanical carder at home. I do have to hand crank it. And it takes, to make a bat, which is what it's called when it's done, it's called a bat. It takes about half a day to make a hand bat on that thing. So it's kind of time consuming. But the motorized ones are pretty pricey. And the hand ones are, they're affordable for people like me. And, there's all kinds of other tools and equipment you can buy. There's actually, I've seen it, but they're thousands of dollars. And it looks almost like a heater or an air conditioner. And it does the wet felting for you. You just put the fibers in there, and it does the work for you. And there's an electric hand tool. It's made by Addy, which is a pretty well-known craft tools. And you can use it. The only problem with it is it overheats really fast, and then it stops working. I've replaced mine. I think I'm on my 3rd or 4th one. And they are guaranteed for like 6 months or a year. So I'm burning them out in 6 months, before 6 months is up. I think it's only 6 months. So I actually have just stopped using it because it's too frustrating. It's got only one needle in it, and you have to move really fast, or what happens is you felt really deeply in one spot. Not good. You want to kind of felt everything equally as you go.
Alana, can you describe to us how you are able to achieve these lines? I understand that the way that you're mixing the colors and pulling it thinner and thinner might give us these transparencies, the kind of layers. But how did you get these incredible lines that you achieve? Or even, I guess the dots maybe are more clear, but these lines or these concentric circles, how do you do that?
So when we're slumming at night, which is we call watching Netflix, I sit there and I make these lines. And I have a whole bunch of them in here. I thought they would get really messed up, but actually I can pull them apart fairly easily. Although this is really... So here's a blue one. So they're not hard to make. I have a little bowl of water next to me, and I take the fiber, a hunk of fiber, and I start pulling it apart like this. And then as I get fewer strands at one end, I wet it down a little bit, and then I roll it between my hands, and I just keep doing that. And I get these long strands of lines. I can actually make them so long I have to break them apart. They're too long. But that's all it is. And then I have discovered, as I've worked with the felt over time, that I need to get a pretty solid base of the felt down. And by solid, I mean it needs to be fairly well felted, but not completely felted, because it still has to accept the lines I'm adding to it. But if I start when the fiber is really loose, and the fiber is, I mean, it's pretty, when you start out, it's loose. So this is kind of what I start with. This is a combination, no, I think this is all silk. Yeah, this is silk. Silk doesn't really felt very well. It will wet felt to the wool. So I'll use it in the upper layers. The really nice thing about the silk and some of the other plant fibers, like bamboo is another one that gets used. They also use soy fiber. I found the soy fiber is really too weak for needle felting. They shine. The wool doesn't shine much, although I do have a few wools that are pretty luscious. But by and large, you can get a contrast on the surface in your reflection back at the viewer by using silk and stuff in the final layer. So these rays here are silk, and some of this yellow in here, they're silk on top. And because I do that spray at the last couple of layers, they're actually felted down. They will adhere. People who are doing wet felting really get into using a lot of different fibers because they all look different, and they'll even use some fabrics. Like I've seen people do felting with velvet as part of the felt.
But when I did your class, the piece I did, I put my dog's hair.
Right. Yeah, you can use animal hair. Yeah. I just found some Angora somebody gave me.
Do you dye the fiber?
They come to me pre-dyed.
Okay.
You can do that if you prefer.
Have you ever tried to paint on the fibers or not?
I could see where you might be able to paint dye onto the fiber. I wouldn't use paint. I think it might look, yeah.
You kind of dye in places.
Yeah, no, there are people who paint. I've seen it done, but they're using acrylics, and I don't think but there are people, you certainly could paint on it with a real dye, like an acid dye.
And how many types of fibers do you use in a piece?
I'm kind of sticking mostly to wool and a little bit of silk, because what the other fibers do is they add more shine, which is what silk does really well. And some of them are really, like I mentioned before, they're kind of weak. Like there's also rose fiber. I mean, I can't believe how many different kinds of fibers. There's mint fiber. It's like, hello, how many different kinds of fibers do I need? How about hemp fiber? Anyhow, but they're not very strong. And so when you needle into them, it breaks the fibers. And I just don't, because because it's not a real animal fiber, it's not truly felting, I'm a little worried that it's just going to weaken the piece. And I have silk, which will felt into wool. So I feel like I should just stick with it because it's doing what I want.
And I don't remember this piece had iridescent, but you've had other pieces that have iridescence in it?
Yeah, that I'm usually using the stuff from the back. There was that one piece I did that had birds in it, and it was like a star field. Yeah, that's, God, I can't think of the name of it. I'm sorry, it slips my mind. There is but it's plastic. What it is really plastic. It is iridescent, and I've used it a lot on the back, like I do on these, except in that particular case, I was using that kind of fiber and just pushing a little bit through so it got a dot would show. So as you moved past the work, they would flash like stars. That was my goal in that one. I was telling somebody I have this love-hate relationship with glitter. What? Yeah, I don't, I think it's because my mother did. She made eggs, like out of duck. She'd take a duck egg and she'd cut it in half, and she would put braid around the edges and glitter and sequins and velvet and, yeah. That's where my love-hate relationship with that kind of stuff comes from.
Alana, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Alana, when you put this, is it arbitrary? The way you put these colors, or is it like, are you reversing your brain the whole time when you're putting that?
No, and that's why, remember I said sometimes I cheat? Yeah, so this I'm just putting it down very randomly. I'm trying to do, this is mostly oranges. The other thing is there's a certain kind of wool that works really well for this procedure on the back, but it doesn't come in very many colors. It has a much shorter staple to it, so the fibers are real short, and it works really well on the back. Whereas if I'm using this The other fiber that I just showed you, the strands are long, they're like 4 to 6 inches, and it's really hard to work it on the back and to get it to be really solid on the back side. So I'm finding it very frustrating. I do mix in some of the other ones. I know there was quite a bit on this one because I just can't get enough shades of orange to suit me. So I'll use the longer strand ones on the back, but they just don't work as well. And the whole process is so time consuming. I do try to figure out ways to make it just a little bit shorter. So yeah, that's why I cheat. Like if I'm not getting on the front from the back what I want, I can just throw more on the back. As long as it's not completely felted. Now this one is really, really close to being completely felted. Like here today, I got too much on the back of this one. I was trying to be fast. And this is how you know it's felted. It's really, really hard for me to pull this apart. That's a piece of felt now. I'm not going to do it on the front. I haven't felted the front as much. It's not quite done yet. But that's kind of what you're looking for, is that solid. And the front, eventually. I just haven't finished the front. And somebody asked me once, do you reach a point where you can't put more fiber on? Yes, you can. Where it gets so stiff and so solid and firm in this part of it that you can't push any more into it. It's completely felted. This is not like that yet. There's still a lot of room to change. This is going to have clouds as well.
Can you still call that done though? It looks great.
You can. Yes, you can. I've seen a lot of stuff that's done that's very, very loose fibers, and it has a completely different look. I kind of worry about it over longevity because I'm not sure those fibers are just going to stay where this person is. They're barely on, you know. But you can get movement that way. You can put the fibers in different directions and make it really obvious that this one's going up and this one's going across. You can make leaves that way, but it makes me a little nervous. Personally, it makes me nervous because I just don't think it's going to hold up.
Well, one thing that is here is all kind of things. How about light fastness and durability of all the colors and stuff?
They recommend you not put them in the sunlight, but that's true of almost all of your fine art materials.
Have you lost any of time?
No. I have a whole bunch of them out in the direct sun right now, so I'll let you know.
1 second, Mary, you had a question. Well, you were showing the lines on here, so then you just lay it down
And poke it in. Yeah, I have to do it more than once, you know, and I have adapted one of my needles, so I have 2 needles that I can poke them in with in a line. And it's really interesting. If you listen, you can hear the fibers being poked in, and you can also feel it. So I usually have one hand down holding something where I want it, and I can feel it moving under my fingers as I poke. So some of them get left on top and some of them get pushed in. So some of the line work is just lying on top, but part of it is in. The underneath side has been pushed into the fiber underneath it.
And how many lines, like for your one raindrop?
You mean?
One straight line, like, is that several?
No, it's just one. It's just one.
Have you experimented with different linen, different thickness, grades?
No, this is the first thing I've done on linen. I did one trial piece though. What I read about it was it needs to be fairly open weave. So this is a fairly loose weave linen. And it's not expensive at all. It was like $30 for this huge. I had to buy 2 of them to finish this, but it was very large and not expensive at all.
Alana, what did you say you read about the
It has to be a loose leaf linen. Some people actually needle felt on burlap, which is very loose. So that gives you kind of an idea. I don't know. You can probably see it around the edges. You can see through it. It's pretty fine. I think burlap is a little bulkier, maybe.
I don't know if there's time for this, but could you
Oh,
the sculptures.
sure.
Because that's fun, right?
Yeah, this is felting too. So these are also, it's the same process. They're needle felted. The difference is they're needle felted over a foam form. Boy, that's hard to say. Foam form. That I buy, well, I think they're exercise logs, aren't they? Those long tube things. Yeah, so I started with one of those and I shaped it. And then I felt into it. It's a little difficult. It's not the best technique in the world. This is one I've developed myself. Because as you're felting, what happens is the fibers pull together and shrink up. So as I'm felting, I have to pull the fibers off of the foam because they will, as I felt, it sticks to the foam. And then kind of stretch it out a little bit and put it back on. And it's really hard to get it back in exactly the same way, in the same place. So it's not really the best way, I don't think, to do three-dimensional, but it seems to work okay. This one is the first three-dimensional one I did, and I actually worked pretty flat on it. I was felting over a bowl in the middle, a big bowl with a piece of foam over that. And it worked out okay because I was able to fold it up. But you know, it's really, the technique is exactly the same in a way. It is needle felted. I've always loved bamboo, and I've always wanted to work with bamboo. And I thought, okay, it's just seemed perfect to me to combine the two. And again, the bamboo, it took me a while to figure out how to bend it. So I'm just using a torch and heating it and bending it as I heat it. It's pretty simple. There's places where it's difficult because it has these nodules in them. The nodules are harder than this part. So sometimes it's really hard to get a smooth bend. The bend will break at the nodule. It probably bothers me more than anybody else that they do that, because I'm always looking for that continuous curve. But I don't, like I say, I'm not even sure anybody else even notices it. And these are the Sea Ranch series. This 4 here and the one in the back, it's said in the literature that there was 8 of them. These are separate and unrelated. Obviously they relate because they're out of the same brain, but they're not a part of the series. I mean, that same general idea. This one, you know, talk about having to work with something that goes completely wrong. This one went totally wrong. It came out completely different than I envisioned. It was supposed to be upright like this and bending forward like that with like 1 or 2 pieces of bamboo. That sucker wouldn't do it. So I just got a bunch of bamboo and started bending it and started adding it in until I reached a point where it felt finished to me. And what I mean by feeling finished, basically finished to me is when I look at something and my eye doesn't stop somewhere except maybe at the center of interest. Like on this piece here, I already know I'm going to change something, because when I look at it, and you may not be able to see it, these lines in here are much lighter blue than these in here. And every time I look at this piece, my eye stops right there and doesn't go past it, which is telling me that this is not quite right. I need to change this area. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, is something that your eye travels through over and over, and whatever, when you reach one point, that point brings you back in to the piece somehow, whether it's a sculpture or 13 panels or whatever. That's when it feels finished. Also, the dark lights have to be kind of balanced. It's interesting because you start out with this like kind of ethereal concept of, oh, I'm going to do global warming. But what you end up working with are the same things. It's the shapes, it's the color, it's the light, it's the transparency. You know, you can have a message, but it still has to work as a painting or a sculpture. Anything else?
Is there volcanoes?
Volcanoes?
Oh, I don't know, that's what I'm seeing there.
A tornado?
Tornado.
Yes, that is a tornado. Because I was going to keep going up on these before I changed my mind about it, I had all these different cloud formations in my head to use because they change as you go up in the atmosphere. As it gets colder, they become more icy and they actually look different. And I didn't end up with as many cloud variations as I wanted to, but you know, whatever. This is a lenticular cloud. That's a cloud that people often think is a spaceship. But it's not. You often see them over a mountain. They're called lenticular because they kind of look like a lentil, I guess. So yeah.
Alana, when you put your sketch together, were you composing in terms of form? Like, I don't think you had this gradation with height yet at that time, or did you?
With what, Lisa?
The graduation of height, did you have that? Because you mentioned that you were thinking about doing it in a straight line, and you changed that.
No, it was always going to step up.
It was going to step up.
What changed was stepping it down. This by the time I got to this one, this was going to be like 7 or 8 feet high.
And then my other question is, in your drawing, is it like a narrative that you drew of like things progressively changing?
Yes,
That's what you drew?
yes.
And you had like each panel you kind of called like a different phase of this progression?
No, I didn't call it anything. I mean, it was like the rain was heavy, and then because I decided I had to have more variation, I looked more at rain and stuff like that, and I thought I need more patterns. So I came up with this, which is a lighter rain on water, and they form these little concentric circles when they fall into the water. And this is like a wave coming in, a very shallow one. And I just wanted to make sure that there was enough variation within the painting to keep it interesting. I didn't want it to get stagnant. Okay. It has a lot of energy to it. And I didn't have these water, what would you call them when they, drops, I guess, but they're going up, because that's what happens as they go up. I didn't have those in there originally. It wasn't in my original drawing. And I added them to one. I thought, oh, damn, now I have to add them to all of them. Not such a good idea, Alana. Anyway, it grew from the original. But you saw the original drawing was this really tiny little thing. And when a person makes something so much larger, it really changes what you're doing. I mean, you can't start with this little 8-inch drawing and go to 16 feet without making some changes in there.
As well, would you find that because there's so many drawings and you have like a whole plan and picture of what you're doing, would you find that I've done like a smaller piece and sometimes I didn't fill totally the back. I would fill up an area of the back and then I would fill the other side and then I would continue. And I feel like I was just creating as I went.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you done that or is it?
This piece was definitely, I was adding and changing and creating as I went along. I had a concept and I kind of floated with it as I went through it. You know, like I say, I had made some changes that I didn't expect, especially the change in the overall format was big because it meant, well, adding 3 more panels, which I hadn't really planned on. But it's been real interesting to do the desert because even though I grew up in Southern California, I have some experience with it. You know, I've done the Death Valley thing and all that kind of stuff. It's so different. It's so different than living here. You know, that dry, hot, there's nothing there. I mean, I've added colors to the desert thing. I mean, I'm looking at these photographs and they're all mustard color. That's it. And blue sky, that's all. Nothing else. Maybe a little bit of darker mountains in the background, like, you know, a little bit of maybe red in the mountains in the background. I'm going, oh. Anyhow, it was interesting.
So, I was just going to say, because you let it come, you had the sketch,
Mm-hmm.
and you let something happen, it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And that, for me, that's what makes the vitality of the thing.
Right, right. It's to kind of,
That I really like.
thank you.
It's some kind of a play of planning and then not planning.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I've noticed working on this, if I'm not careful, if I have 3 mountains to make and I'm not paying attention, they're all going to be symmetrical. They're all going to be identical. It was real interesting to discover that, you know, that my brain wants to make things equal. And I have to force it not to do that.
Do you have a vision of where it might end up?
No, but it would really be nice if it wasn't in my basement. No, you know, Lisa's made a couple suggestions. I've had a couple ideas. I'd like to get it shown a little bit more. There's a craft gallery in San Francisco, and there's one up in, not Ukiah, Fort Bragg.
I just saw a perfect spot in LA last week.
Yeah. Yeah, so,
Perfect market.
yeah, I'm going to try to get it some other space.
So Alana works not only in felt, but she works in mixed media painting. These felt sculptures came after, if I'm not mistaken, a whole bunch of other fiber sculptures that are a little bit similar to it, but they're made out of different materials, correct? Like the stuff you have in the
Well, it started with it because I've knit since I was a kid. I learned how to knit really young. So I started knitting again when I was not feeling well. And I thought, I could shrink these up and do felted things. And that's how the felting started, was by knitting, which has also been done for a number of years now. And then I thought, I could, I don't have to just use wool. I can go get eucalyptus bark and add it, which is some of the stuff I did. I added on a few of them, I had madrone bark in them. And I just hold the bark and the yarn together and knit it and then shrink it in the washing machine. So yeah, she's talking about, this is one of the few that actually, this was knit. This is silk cocoons that they've opened up and sewn together. One of the very few that really has a different kind of fiber that I used on it.
Can you tell us, this one has a narrative that's easy to speak about. Is there any kind of narrative or background that you can tell us about those ones?
Yeah, when my kids, who are now old, anyhow, when I had a family and we all lived together, I also had a daycare center, and we would escape up the coast. I lived in Berkeley at that point, believe it or not, and we would escape up the coast to Sea Ranch. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Sea Ranch. So at Christmas, when they were out of school and the daycare center was closed, we would go up there for, depending upon how the vacation fell, for 2 to 2.5 weeks. And so this is Dreams of Sea Ranch. That's kind of what it's about. We would go up there, and my daughters, I have 2 daughters, and I were all really, really, really into shells. And they don't have fantastic shells there, but they do have a few. Like they have Venus winteltraps and a couple other things there. And we would go down to the beach, and they'd have these huge mounds of shells and rocks of all different kinds. And the three of us would sit there for hours at a time, going through them looking for the treasures. So there was one time one of my daughters, she was really into beach combing. She and I went out, it was pouring rain, and we'll go, oh, we'll find something, it's okay, we'll go, it's fine. So we go out and we're tramping along the beach, we go, and there's nothing here, it's pouring rain, the shells are all out in the ocean because they do wash in and out at night, and there's high tides, and when you get there and it's low tide, it's like, oh, and they have a lot of low tides I discovered in December, which is when we were there. But she and I were determined we were going to find shells, so we walked across 3 beaches. I don't know how much you know about Sea Ranch, but that meant we got back into the car twice. So we got to the 3rd beach, and we were just determined. But there was just nothing. And I finally looked at her, and we're both saying we're soaking wet. I mean, literally soaking wet. It's pouring rain. The sun's going down. I looked at her and I said, honey, I don't think today's going to be our day. So we did go home. But that's what a passion the shells were. And interestingly enough, it's also how I got into first making jewelry, because I have a collection of shells and I wanted to do something with them. So I started making them into jewelry. And I have a few of them left. Most of them I've sold. But I got into metalworking, making jewelry, and from there I got into enamel work. And that was the whole shell thing has just engendered all of this stuff, for me personally anyway. So that's kind of the story for me. It's like, we had a great time there. We really did. We didn't have a TV. We played games. We went beach combing. It was wonderful. So that's kind of my mind. That's where I go. I'm back with my younger children and out on the beach getting wet.
You mentioned that you were self-taught. Were you self-taught in everything you do, or just with
I did take metalsmithing when I was making jewelry, because I'm not sure you can teach yourself metalsmithing. First of all, you have to learn how to use a torch safely. And, there's a lot of different techniques in metalsmithing. And I didn't even learn all of them when I was going to classes. And luckily for me, I found a man who did private instruction, and his studio was 3 blocks from my house. I could walk there. It was just great. So.
Did you study art too, though?
I was an art major at Occidental College when I went to school. They had a really bad art program. They had basically one teacher. They had one teacher for studio art, and they had a woman doing art history. And I changed my major at the end of my sophomore year. So I stuffed all of my art classes into 2 years. I almost didn't graduate with my class, but I was able to do it. And it just wasn't a very solid curricula that they had there for art. I didn't go there intending to be an art major. They were well known for other things, but not art. I did, after I started having kids, I did start taking classes. Being situated in Berkeley is a great place if you want to continue education, because there's UC Berkeley, there's CCA, there's San Francisco Art Institute. There's just a wealth of places you can go and take classes there. And I took a lot of extra classes. I took figure drawing, human anatomy, a bunch of other stuff, metalsmithing. I won a scholarship to the metalsmithing program at San Francisco State. So I took part of that. I couldn't take the whole thing because my daughter got sick. But yeah, no, I did take an awful lot of classes afterwards.
And have you shown your work in other places besides Lake County?
Oh yeah.
Tell us, just give us like a
Japan, Germany, England, all over the States. Mostly with my enamel and jewelry work, because I was really pushing it out. I was spending time doing that. I'm not doing that right now, which is what you have to do. No one's going to come to your door and go, "Hi, we'd love to have you in our gallery." You have to go out. And I was doing it then.
You were also featured in Craft Magazine, is my understanding.
Yeah, that was the enamel work.
Mm-hmm. I would, does anybody else have any questions? Any other questions? I want to thank Alana for sharing her work with us, for sharing her skills with us, for helping me curate these shows around here. I want to
That's the fun part.
thank all of you for coming, and I've been told that I need to make a pitch every time I get a chance. So Shirley actually congratulated us on some of the grants we've been getting. Everybody should know that all the grants we get are specifically for projects. They mostly support the teachers, the promotion, and the work that goes into them, and they're all under $20,000. It's not a lot of money. So each month we have to come up with $3,000 to pay for rent and all of the operating costs. And like Alana, most of the work that goes on here for operations is volunteer based. So I encourage you to help support the arts and make money because it is invaluable. I mean, just look at what we're able to do, what we're able to experience, what we're able to see, even what we've got going on outside. It's like, this is cultural enrichment for all of us. And we do need everybody to pitch in whatever you can to help us keep the doors open, because volunteers are going to get burnt out eventually. And if we can find a way to support this building and support the people who work here or persons who work here to keep the place operational, then we have a sustainable community asset. And it's very important. And for, Graham's on the board. We are looking for new board members, additional board members. David and Trudy are from the Lake County Blue. They help us with the publicity every week. Anything that you can offer in terms of volunteering, joining the board, becoming a member, dropping even $5 in the donation box. It's like all of these things add up and they help us to sustain this place so that we can continue to feature people like Alana for free or for nominal costs with wine tastings, which today was just, you could buy wine if you wanted, and to have all the other wonderful events and shows here that we do have. So I thank you all for coming, and I thank Alana most of all for providing us with this wonderful
You're welcome.
explanation of her work. I would like to ask if you don't mind just leaving your book open, because first I want to get a picture of it.
Okay.
And second of all, for people to see like how it developed from this sketch to that, I think is quite fascinating.
Okay.
So, and one more thing is that these sculptures that Alana puts, like every time we have a show, she brings us a bunch of her sculptures and we figure out different ways to put them together so that they're interesting. So that's another wonderful thing about having Alana with us, is we get to keep playing with her work and making installations and different ways of presenting it. It's a lot of fun. So anyway, thank you, Alana.
You're welcome. Thank you. Here's my notes.
Here's the sketch.